Hi, everyone. Brian Anderson here at Fathering Together. I'm really excited to bring to you a conversation with Jim Young. He is the Centered Coach. He does a lot of work with men and fathers to better integrate themselves to be centered, so to speak. So I don't want to tell too much of his story. I want him to be able to speak to yourself, but to himself, excuse me. But over the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to share a little bit of his strategy and what he does to help men in your position better be integrated. So Jim, share a little bit about how you came to be the Centered Coach.
Sure, I'll try and give you the brief version of it. I spent about 25 years in the corporate world during that time, building a family. And I got to a place towards the end of that time, and this was a handful of years ago, where I couldn't see the forest for the trees. I was burned out, and I decided I needed to make a change. And about 3 years ago, I decided to leave my corporate career and go into coaching. I identified pretty quickly what I wanted to do was to help men. I wanted to help men in particular, but people find the calm centered place from which they do their best at work and in life. And over the last few years, I've refined that and gotten to a place where I've done a lot of coaching for executives, CEO, founder types, dads, almost exclusively in that camp, and realized this year that I really wanted to focus on helping men find better balance in their life and kind of coming through the front door of the experience of burnout, which a lot of us have had and is an easy road to step onto these days, into something that is going to allow them to be high achieving at work and as a dad and as a spouse and as a friend and all of those things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, so much, especially in this pandemic, as we're seeing this great resignation and people really reassessing their values and what they need out of life. There's definitely some tension I've heard in talking with other CEOs and senior leaders of what the company needs, what the individual needs, and hopefully there's a middle ground, right, as we look forward. And so I'm wondering kind of where do you see that tension playing out in, and what are some avenues for easing that tension?
Yeah, where I often see that tension playing out is in old archetypes, old stories, especially around manhood, masculinity, what are the types of guys that we're supposed to be. And the old leadership models of command and control that say you've got to take it on and you've got to do it and you've got to figure it out and be right and tell people what to do, I think is where so much of the stress lives, because it creates this dynamic of people who don't get a say in the conversation and people who have too much say and they have to figure everything out for themselves, and so much pressure. So a lot of the work that I do is helping leaders identify how can I have the conversations that bring everybody into it in the right proportion. It's not, give away the farm and like everybody's running the business and it's chaos. It's really how do we co-create so that everybody understands where we're going and has a chance to play the role that they're meant to play.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, especially because as Fathering Together, it's on our name, right? Like, how do we take our skills and our strengths and leverage those with others we meet? Because as I've used this example before, my neighbor is a great coder. He does all sorts of web design. I'm a chaplain, right? And so together we kind of have what it takes to be a complete package for our kids, and we are often kind of trading kids off. And I'm good with my hands, and I built a deck with my girls, and so we trade that, right? And on a larger scale in the business world, like, we have a team to be successful in business. How do we make it? How do we make that work for everyone? So I love that. One question I would love to also hear from you is, many of, as you say, you work with a lot of dads in senior leadership positions. Many of us spent most of our lives not being dads, right? We built all of these skills to grow our professional identity. How have you seen the shift or that transition from I'm a great employee or I'm a great leader in the office? How do they apply that in their personal or home life?
It's a great question. I think a lot of the same skills come into play. It's just that we have to shift our perspective maybe a little bit. And I think that same mantra of how do we do it together? How is it not at this pyramid where at the top I have to call all the shots? And so what I've discovered in my research and conversations with people across genders over the last few years is there's this tremendous value in the world for men. And I think that's gotten a little bit muddied in some of the difficult conversations that have needed to be had around, toxic masculinity is the term that's been used a lot. So I just kind of use that as a frame. And that it's made the pendulum swing to this place where masculinity is bad. And it's not. It's just that when it's overplayed, when that energy isn't counterweighted by feminine energy, by more receptive, nurturing qualities, that we start to have challenges because it's out of balance. So in the workplace, it's being able to listen as well as provide direction, and be able to have that interchange where you're taking in the feedback and the perspectives from across the organization, regardless of what their gender or role or anything else is in the company. And I think you bring that home too. If you think about that, there's a great article that I read in the Atlantic the other day about gender equity at the home, and they talked about all of the division of labor, and we've started as a society to balance that, men doing more childcare. And there's still so much more work to do. There's still some listening for us to do as men, and stepping forward and stepping back, giving space for our partners to take on things that we might have done. And also knowing that, like, yeah, somebody's got to plan the birthday party or schedule the doctor's appointments for the kids, because it's the invisible work that
Right,
sometimes doesn't get done.
right, right. Uh, the the invisible work piece I want to touch on, because I've been thinking about that as well, because it's not really invisible, right? Like all the stuff that we do, not to challenge your wording, it's what we hear about in the media, right? But when we think about the work at home, all of the program management level minutia of, did we call this number, do we go to this place, that all gets taken place in the work, right, in our workplaces. We have staff to do that, and our partners, our children are not our staff, right? And I think that's the piece that I myself too, as the executive director of this nonprofit, been frustrated with myself, that I fall into these tropes, I fall into these paradigms of, well, I need to be the big strategic thinker, I don't need to worry myself with the small things.
Yeah.
But it's those small things that really cultivate deep relationship, at least that I've found, right? In my coworkers places, and in relationships with my family, when you take a moment to be other centered and do some of that kind of small work for your children, for your partners, what have you, that's really where you put that trust in the bank, so to speak. I don't know if you agree, or if you want to speak to
I
that.
agree, and I love the nuances, because your note of the invisible. I picked up. You made a note of the small things, and what I see as the small things in that reference you made are the emotional engagement, like what the pieces where we have to step in and pause and not do something, but actually see what's going on in the relationship. What's the feeling that's happening, and that's a foreign territory for so many guys. Like, we were not socialized to that. We were actually socialized away from dealing with emotions. And so coming in, into our family or into our workplace, into our friendships, and pausing to see what's going on, and bearing some of that emotional labor of that men haven't been asked to step up for. That's a lot of the work that I do, is helping. How do we use emotional intelligence to listen better, to be part of healthier relationships, which ultimately I think relieves our stress.
Yeah, yeah, that emotional intelligence piece. We see it in business magazines and articles all the time about what that does for you in the workplace to rise up the corporate ladder, so to speak.
Yeah.
To be able to to navigate your team and use them effectively on that emotional level, not just the IQ you might have and the skills you have. And I'm excited to see that starting to play out in some of our fatherhood spaces, and definitely in your conversations. Would you say there's an emotion or two that is easier or harder for dads to check into, or senior leaders? Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to just share a quick thing that came up as you were saying that, is that I think in that leadership space, emotional intelligence has gotten a lot of play as a competitive advantage of
Right.
sorts. And I want to reframe that as it's a collaborative advantage. So that's just an aside to plant there.
No, it's great. I love that. Yeah.
To your question, yeah, I'm trained in a particular model of emotional intelligence, and in that model, a couple that come to mind that you described. You asked, what might be more challenging for men or dads. Emotional self-awareness is the first one, and it's really the starting point for everything. Is, how do I feel? And there's a trope out there that the emotions that men understand are mad, sad, and glad.
Right.
That's it. So first of all, how do we expand our vocabulary around emotions? And then how do we become aware? How do we know that I'm not mad, I'm frustrated, or I'm confused, or some other variation of that root emotion. And I think the other one is emotional emotional expression. How do we safely, connectedly
Yeah.
use our emotions and express them to other people so they can be let in to us? And I'll throw one more in as a bonus, is empathy. It's something that I've studied a little bit in the men that I've coached through this EQI certification or assessment rather, that there seems to be a trend that men score lower on empathy than women do.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, there's so much to unpack there. And we want to keep this conversation short for today. Because there's so much, as I said, to unpack, but to dive into, especially around empathy and how we show up and care and manage ourselves, not just our family, and name. I love that. I've had so many conversations where men can't name the emotion they're going through, or they just equate sadness and vulnerability just to tears. And there's so much more around showing up and expressing yourselves in that vulnerable way, that we need to have a place to talk as fathers and men in that way. So I appreciate you just kind of taking a quick little sliver of time to join us for our C-Suite Dad newsletter this week. Really appreciate it, Jim. How can people reach you if they have more questions for you? What's the best way to connect?
Yeah, the best way to find me, anything about the work that I do, is at thecenteredcoach.com. That's my website. It's got any kind of contact information that you need. And if it's okay, I'd love to just put in a plug for something that touches on what we were talking about. I'm running something starting next on October 25th on a Monday. It's called the Courage in Conversations Challenge. And it's for men to have the game-changing, emotionally intelligent conversations that help them alleviate some of these stressors that can lead to burnout and can create more balance in our lives. And that's at courageinconversationschallenge.com. You can find a link to that on the website as well.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for joining us this week, Jim. We'll have more coming up in the weeks ahead, and appreciate you all for your time today. Thanks for being a part of the C-Suite Dad community.
Appreciate it. Thank you.